In this video, we will look at what is the difference between basic and diluted number of shares. So let us look at first of all what are basic number of shares. Now basic number of shares are actual number of shares that are outstanding as on date for a company. So let us say we are saying that the company has 15 million shares that are outstanding as on date today. So it means that these shares may include the shares of promoters, so promoters, or the shares with financial institutions, which may include DII, domestic institutional investors, or FII, or it may be part of public holding. So basic number of shares are actual number of shares that are already issued and completely paid up. So those are what are called as basic number of shares. And then beyond this basic number of shares in the company, there could be certain convertibles. So convertibles, so what could be convertibles? We will look at that. So convertibles may be convertible preference shares, or those could be ESOPs, which are expected to convert into shares in due period of time, or those could be convertible debentures. So these are some of the examples that I'm sharing with you which can form part of convertible. So these are the shares which are probably issued, but the equivalent of them is not converted into actual number of shares right now. So probably in the months to come, in the years to come, these convertibles will actually get converted into basic number of shares. So if we consider these convertibles and add it to basic number of shares, what we get is diluted number of shares. So that is the difference between basic and diluted number of shares. Okay, so mostly you would see diluted number of shares also includes the hidden shares, or shares that have been issued but will be converted into actual number of shares at a later date. Okay, so basic plus convertibles is diluted number of shares. So if you use this basic and diluted number of shares for calculation of EPS, or for that matter any per share number, you would have a basic EPS and the other would be diluted EPS. Naturally, given that diluted number of shares are higher than the basic number of shares, the EPS derived from diluted number of shares would be lower than the EPS derived by basic number of shares. So most of the time it is recommended that while you use any per share number, you use diluted number of shares to be on the conservative side. So let us say, assuming for some PAT, you are getting basic EPS of the company to be 120 and diluted EPS of the company to be 100, then if you use this EPS to calculate P multiple of the company, so P multiple using basic EPS and P multiple using diluted EPS, and assuming the price of the share to be 1200, you would see P multiple of the company using basic EPS would be 10 and that using diluted EPS would be 12. Now naturally, if you look at the difference between the P multiples, the difference is huge, which is about 20%, which is a similar difference between this number and the basic and diluted EPSs. So you would see that basic EPS would yield more aggressive valuation. What I mean by aggressive valuations is that it may prompt or it may indicate that the stock is undervalued and there is a possibility of some upside in this stock, whereas if you use diluted EPS, you would see that the stock is actually relatively overvalued, and you coming to the conclusion of it being undervalued may not happen actually. So over here you would see it could be overvalued. Now here all that we are using is comparison with within the company's numbers itself, but overall if you use diluted EPS, there are chances that you turn out to be little conservative in terms of the stock that you are recommending. Okay, so you happen to be conservative. Thank you.